Controversial opinion, Logic Pro has absolutely stellar stock plugins. Wait, is that actually controversial though? I'm going to show you 10 Logic Pro stock plugins that you absolutely need to know. And I'm also going to show you some cool ways that I've used them in my own productions on a few. It's like a double whammy. Number 1, vintage EQs, and specifically the Pultec inspired EQ inside of Logic. Let me guess, the EQ that you've been spending all of your time using in Logic is this guy right here, the good old channel EQ. And while it works great for subtractive EQ, if you want to use additive EQ, which is boosting EQ frequencies, for me, I use the vintage Pultec style EQ or the tube EQ all the time for boosting high frequencies and adding in some nice color. So if we listen to this piano example right here, while it sounds great, if I boost it on the highs and add a bit of drive, it sounds like this instead. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And a ton of Logic users don't know that there are actually 3 different vintage EQs to pick from inside Logic itself, and they all have their own unique sounds. So you should probably give it a try. Number 2, the Compressors. That's Compressors with an S, that's plural. If you open up the Logic compressor, this is what pops up, but a lot of people don't know that you can actually switch between 7 different compressor emulations on the top of the plugin. Nathan, why does this matter? Well, it's because each compressor sounds different. For example, I find the Platinum Digital compressor to be a super neutral sounding compressor. So if you want compression without color, this works great. And a lot of times I use this as my early compression, and then I'll use a different emulation to add in some color later on. The VCA compressor, on the other hand, is great for adding a bit of color into the sound. Same goes for the Studio FET and the Vintage FET. And the Opto, or the optical, is another very smooth option. And if you start using the distortion knob to add some soft or hard distortion, you can really color the sound a pretty significant amount. Do this if you don't believe me. Put this on a vocal and then just switch between the emulations while playing the audio. You'll hear what I'm talking about. Try it, just trust me. Number 3, the stereo spreader. Now, while this is a very simple tool, it can be so helpful in making a sound more wide. So if you have a piano that you want sounding more wide to get a bit more depth, you can throw this on and it will certainly help. You can use it on guitars, pianos, and even vocals, but be careful because if you use it on a lead vocal, for example, it can sound a little off balance between the left and the right channels if you don't tweak it, so keep an ear out for that. You might also want to even try sending your vocal to a bus with stereo spreader on it and mix it into taste. So there's a little pro tip bonus for you. So here's a vocal without stereo spreader on and then one with it turned on.
I'm coming back to where it all started. I'm coming back to where it all started. I won't come back, I might get lost. I'm gonna come back.
Number 4. Okay, so just hold on a second because this one is a little bit of a 2-for-1. It's a plugin and a pro tip I learned from my buddy Forrest Whitehead. You should subscribe to him as well, by the way. So number 4 is using sample delay, but use this on vocals to get that doubled vocal sound. You can obviously use stereo spreader for some width, but sample delay is gonna help it actually sound like it was doubled without ever having to track a doubled vocal. So open up sample delay to either dual mono or stereo, depending on if you're on a stereo or a mono track, and then simply turn up the delay just a bit and notice how much this changes the sound on this vocal.
It's like going back home, back to where I belong.
Now, the more you crank it, the less good it's going to sound for this effect specifically. It'll start sounding really kind of separated.
It's like going back home, back to where I belong.
But if you've already tracked vocals and are like, ah, dang, I wish I would have tracked some doubles and I didn't, and now my vocalist is gone and I'm totally screwed. Don't worry, buddy. Just use sample delay on dual mono or stereo mode and turn it up a smidge. Number 5, vocoder synth. Yes, Logic has a vocoder built right into it. So open up a MIDI track. Now, it must be a MIDI track. You cannot use this with an audio track. So go ahead and open up the vocoder synth. When you open it up, it's gonna look like this. We're gonna go to the top right and click on the drop-down menu for sidechain and select the audio that you want to use the vocoder effect on. In this case for me, it's a vocal, and switch the signal mode to vocal. And now when you play this, you can use your MIDI controller to play the notes, and it will turn that part into a vocoder that you can now play along with whatever you want. Now you do have to be playing the track in order to hear it. If you just play your MIDI notes without playing the actual audio, you won't hear anything, and you'll probably feel kind of dumb. So you can mess around with the settings as much as you want, which I'm not going to really get into for the purposes of this video, but you'll find that you can get a lot of different sounds with it, and then I will usually just blend it into taste.
It's like going back home, back to where I belong. It's like seeing a friend, wishing it'll never end.
Number 6, since we're talking about vocals, Vocal Transformer. So I use this plugin for really one main purpose, and that is changing the formants and pitch overall on vocals very quickly. So let's say you have a lead vocal and realize, again, I wish I would have tracked apart the octave down from the lead. Well, you can actually just double the vocal twice, pan one hard right, pan one hard left, throw Vocal Transformer on them, drop the pitch by an octave, which is 12 semitones, and then adjust the formant so that the two tracks do not have the same formant, which will prevent any weird phasing problems. So quick side note, if you drop the octave down, you're gonna wanna turn the formants down to make it sound a little more like deep, but if you bump the pitch up an octave, for example, you'll probably wanna turn the formants up a notch just to make that sound a little more natural. And then you can get that super dope sound you sometimes hear in pop or EDM tracks with the deep octave vocal doubles. But here's what it would sound like using the same track we've been demonstrating with, just on a phrase that I've already used a double vocal sound, and we'll throw in this effect.
Back to where I belong.
And you can use this plugin for all sorts of different things, like you can even adjust the pitch of hi-hats with this plugin and automate it. So just get creative and try things out. It's not limited to vocals only. Number 7, drum synth. I will say that you can find lots of crappy drum sounds too, but overall it's pretty darn good and definitely usable. You can pick from a few different sources, and once you pick that source, from there you can pick what kind of specific sound you want. So if you choose a snare, you can use any of these particular snare sounds and then shape them however you like with the controls. Now for me, I tend to use a ton of different resources for drum sounds like Battery, Arcade, and a few other drum libraries I have, but I do think this is a solid option within Logic if you're producing pop, hip hop, EDM, or any other genre that would use more electronic drums. Sadly, pretty much all of the Logic acoustic drums pretty much sound like crap, just saying. But here's a quick snippet in the Ocean Eyes track that I made with some of these sounds.
Careful creature made friends with time, left her lonely with a diamond mind.
Number 8, the MIDI effects arpeggiator. The fact that Logic has this built in is super nice, and I've used it numerous times. A lot of times if I want a pumping bass part using like a synth bass, for example, I'll actually use the ARP on an 8th note so I don't have to, play the 8th note part, and it does sound awesome. All I did was just pull up the MIDI effects arpeggiator, set it to 8th notes, and then use that for that pulsing sound. Sounds great. This is like any other arpeggiator. You can get very detailed with it, and it does have a ton of presets you can use for many different situations. You can adjust the velocity. If you set it to grid mode, you can literally tell it what velocity to play each and every note so it doesn't sound robotic. Number 9, now I'd be a total failure if I did not mention this, and that is flex pitch. While this is not a plugin per se that you put onto your actual chain, it is still an insanely valuable element within Logic, but you can literally correct your vocals on a minute level, and it works very similarly to any other graphic pitch correction software like Melodyne, Auto-Tune Pro's graphic mode, or any other option out there. So here's just a raw vocal with no flex pitch correction.
It's been a while since I've seen this place. Still feels like home, but not like it used to.
And obviously this was a pretty darn good performance, but here's that same vocal with flex pitch correction on.
It's been a while since I've seen this place. Still feels like home, but not like it used to.
So obviously there's a big difference, and as you can hear, it does not sound artificial or weird like that terrible auto-tune sound that everyone complains about, which I'm also not a big fan of. And number 10, Quick Sampler. This is also a relatively new addition to the Logic platform from last year's update, and it is incredible. Just made it so much easier to sample literally anything inside of Logic and get pretty detailed in what you can do with manipulation. All you have to do is grab any audio you want to sample, a percussion hit, vocal, anything, open up a MIDI track with Quick Sampler and drag and drop the audio in. Most of the time, you will want to use the optimized option as the selection, and Quick Sampler will automatically find the pitch if there's a pitch and map it out to your keyboard. And you can completely manipulate the sound from within that interface, and you can get about as detailed as you want. And of course, from here, you can do any additional processing you want in your plugin chain. Quick Sampler is just another one of those plugins inside Logic that I come back to over and over and absolutely love using for quick sampling. So here's just taking one single palm muted guitar note from what we tracked for this production and how I can manipulate that. If you want to see how I actually use Quick Sampler to make a vocal pad, you can see how I did that with this video right here. We'll see you soon.